Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Big K.R.I.T, titled Cadillactica. It's one of the most common stories you run into in music. You got a young, aspiring artist, an independent spirit who makes impressive music with depth, complexity, and real emotion behind him, doing it with skill and passion and intellect. He gathers a lot of buzz, he builds up a fan base, he's poised to smash into the mainstream, and he finally signs that big label. He achieves his dream, and then it all seems to fall apart. Suddenly the money gets involved, and to guarantee their investment, the artist is compelled to make the same homogeneous crap we always see. Nothing ever changes in the industry, the artist gets dispirited, and the choices left to him are pretty stark. You lash out, you get dropped from the label. You give in to the machine, you lose your artistic integrity, and you lose some of your fan base who was there for your original work. Or you somehow manage to hold things together and try to maintain a balance between artistry and commercial appeal. And to me, the artist who has managed to do that third option reasonably well was Big K.R.I.T. He originally struck me with his early mixtapes and bringing some impressive rapping, some production, and content to his material that was tempered with real introspection, and yet still definitely had the possibility of crossover appeal thanks to his very radio-friendly, clean brand of production. But when he dropped that first album from Def Jam Live from the Underground in 2012, many, and I would include myself in that group, were just a little bit disappointed. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. Just another radio-friendly hip-hop record featuring a great rapper delivering some cliched content with occasional snippets of real brilliance. He managed to follow it up with King Remembered in Time in 2013, another mixtape that featured a little bit more varied production, and you know what, it was pretty good. But at this point, it was starting to get obvious that Big K.R.I.T was starting to fall towards a holding pattern. Not a bad pattern, mind you, but I found himself thinking that he could be pushing himself harder on more thoughtful tracks, getting to more introspective content, or even aiming at some stronger, punchier club bangers. It was becoming a very familiar pattern, and I got the feeling that Big K.R.I.T really could do more if he started trying harder. And you know what? It started looking like he was gonna try harder. The first promotional single was Mount Olympus, a response to Kendrick Lamar's Control verse in 2013. And though it wouldn't show up on the standard issue of Cadillactica, it showed Big K.R.I.T with more fire and potency than I'd seen in a while from him, with some great bars. And it was enough to get me really enthused to dive into this album, which has been getting critical acclaim across the board and drawing a lot of comparisons to acts like Outkast, acts from the South that I really do like. So, did Big K.R.I.T manage to pull this off? Well, okay, I wouldn't quite go that far, but you know what? Cadillactica by Big K.R.I.T is still pretty damn good across the board. I wouldn't call it great or without duds. There are a fair share of decisions that, from the instrumentation to the lyrics, that probably weren't for the best, but I really couldn't pinpoint a singular issue on this album outside of a series of small elements that just didn't really click for me. That being said, some of the elements that didn't click for me were, well, things that I've always kind of irked me a little bit about Big K.R.I.T, and fans that can more easily connect with him and some of his material and content will likely be able to overlook my nitpicks without question. In other words, it's a good album. You guys should hear it. So let's start with Big K.R.I.T himself. Let me stress that while I prefer his more serious, conscious side, he's the sort of technically skilled rapper that can make your standard issue luxury rap work pretty damn well. And he's got the charisma to make a very similar formula that worked for many rappers coming out of the South like Ludacris and T.I. In other words, while he likes talking about cars on songs like My Sub Part 3, Big Bang, King of the South, or on the borderline love song Do You Love Me For Real, he can bring a certain amount of wit and charisma to these tracks that do make them work for rap with something of a mainstream appeal. Hell, as much as I found the hook on the title track to be a little bit basic and a little bit repetitious, Big K.R.I.T has enough energy to boost the track up to be honestly one of my favorite songs on the album. And while songs like Soul Food and Saturday's Equal Celebration are more of what I prefer to hear from him, I'm not gonna deny that more straightforward bangers like Mo Better Cool can work just as well. What I also definitely appreciate about Big K.R.I.T is his sincerity. Yeah, a song like Third Eye can come across as a little bit corny, and he knows that, but it's honestly charming enough that it does manage to work coming from him. I really like that song. I just wish I could say the same thing about a lot of his guest stars though. Not the artists on his hooks, mind you. Raphael Sadiq, Rico Glove, and Mara Haribi, they all do a good job. And Jamie N. Commons is quietly becoming a singer on hooks that I really do like, thanks to his killer work last year with Eminem on his song Desperation. But his choice of guest rappers is a little bit more shaky. I mean, I didn't mind Big Sant and Bun B on their verses, a little bit generic in terms of their content, but they were well structured, I liked them. But E40 and Wiz Khalifa do nothing for me on Mind Control, easily the worst song on this album by a mile, with an exaggerated hook that seemed to be trying to go for an Andre 3000 vibe, and instead just came across as plain gross. And then there's Lupe Fiasco. And look, I find Lupe Fiasco to be a political rapper who repeatedly delivers some interesting content that's albeit a little bit preachy, but I can't stand stand Lupe Fiasco on features because he never has a chance to fully articulate his politics. It feels boiled down to buzzwords without a lot of meaning behind them. I mean, I get the point of his sarcasm on Lost Generation, but when he's saying that we should be talking about the military-industrial complex instead and how they don't play conscious material at the clubs, when in reality, Big K.R.I.T is probably one of the few rappers who has the balance and the potential to make his material work in a club environment, I'm sorry, Lupe Fiasco's verse just feels strikingly out of place. It didn't work for me whatsoever. See, the thing is that Big K.R.I.T does have some well-articulated ideas on this album. His overarching concept relating the creation of art to making love, it's a little bit thinly sketched, with the strongest callbacks being very early on with the first few tracks, a little on the track Soul Food, and on the closer Lost Generation, but I did really like the idea of how art can define an entire world, an entire planet as he describes it, at least in the eyes of the artist. And it's kind of telling that for Big K.R.I.T on this song, Do You Love Me For Real, initially comes across as a love jam, and then you realize it could just as easily be applied to his car, which it's at least interesting. I get that where his priorities lie here. What helps here is that Big K.R.I.T is a lot more conscious of his environment and tends to write with a more honest worldview, even if he doesn't provide a lot of details to really sketch it out. Soul Food, for instance, it bucks the typical hip-hop trends and laments how many people have traded for lust over love. And Pay Attention is a song where he's in the strip club living it up, only to see the girl that he wished he could have paid more attention to throughout the course of the entire night. He tries to go with a little bit more broader spiritual material on Angels, but honestly, could have used a third verse to intensify the story and ground it just a little bit more beyond a pretty basic metaphor that, well, Steve Wariner did a lot better in Holes in the Floor of Heaven. Now, spiritual metaphors are done a fair bit better on Saturday's Equal Celebration, where Big K.R.I.T tackles death and battles for where one's soul might lie between heaven and hell. And you know what? I'll be honest, I really like Third Eye, where Big K.R.I.T flirts with a girl more for personality and vibe than for her ass, a real change in most hip-hop, and it really comes across as strikingly sincere. I bought that coming from him. That said, I think he needed to put that song on the album to compensate for Mind Control, which operates as a really sleazy hookup track. Now, thankfully, his verse is the classiest, but still, if the premise of your song implies mind control to coerce women to get with you through drugs or through something else, I'm sorry, no matter how you slice it, that's really creepy. But okay, putting all that aside, the other big change on this record is Big K.R.I.T's choice to work with other producers and expand his style a little bit further. And honestly, if we're looking for an area where this album has the most issues, it would probably be here, because the production can be a little bit hit and miss. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the spacier, futuristic synths that Big K.R.I.T uses on songs like Life and the title track, and I'm a huge fan of his usage of horns like on the Standby interlude. Really like the spoken word passage there, but his guitar textures can be a little bit spotty. I mean, I like the down-tempo strumming on Soul Food, but the quasi-80s funk vibe of Angels and the distorted heaviness of Lost Generation just felt a little bit overmixed and lacking a real driving melody for me. And that's not even touching on Mind Control with its sleazy bass line, the chiptune across the verse, and the guitar noodling across the chorus that just came across as completely flat for me. And yet, probably the element that felt the most bafflingly inconsistent was the percussion and the beats, in that Big K.R.I.T occasionally tried to bring in some noisier, more distorted drums in songs like Life, and yet they really lacked a lot of punch for me. It's bizarre considering how thick and prominent the heavy beats on My Sub Part 3 Big Bang were, as someone that almost feels undermixed, relying only on bass, some stuttering reversed hi-hats, and the sounds of the great outdoors. You'd think he'd be able to give the noisier drums some more punch. And funnily enough, on Saturday's Equal Celebration, he actually managed to get it working with Alex the Kid. And thus, it's a little baffling when you get songs like Life that could have used that punch. And yeah, there are some other issues on this album too. I didn't really like the pitch shifting on Pay Attention, never really liked pitch shifting. And I wasn't quite a fan of how thin they made Devin the Dude's voice sound on the hook of Mo Better Cool, but really, if I'm being honest, those are some pretty minor quibbles. Because at the end of the day, I did like Cadillactica a lot. I'm not gonna say I loved it or that it's anywhere close to the best hip-hop record that came out this far this year, especially when it's been a strikingly strong year for hip-hop, especially in the underground. But for Southern hip-hop, it's got a lot of flavor and does maintain a really strong balance between bangers and more conscious material. And all of it could at least land some degree of mainstream airplay, which gives this album a sense of populism that I really did like. So, you know what? For me, it's a solid 7 out of 10. It's a good record, definitely worth your time if you're a Big K.R.I.T fan, or you're just looking for some smarter Southern hip-hop. In other words, Big K.R.I.T is finding a way to make mainstream accessible music that is a little bit smarter. It's got a little bit more conscious weight behind it. And that's a trend that I definitely want to see continue. So all you guys, go check this album out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. What do you guys think of this album? Do you guys think it deserves some of those critical acclaim in the comparisons to Outkast nonetheless? I don't think it's quite at that level yet, but he's getting there. I'll definitely say that. So if there's any other albums you'd like me to cover, or if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, well, I'm all ears. Until then, I'm Mark, You're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.